Tempering validated research with over 20 years of on-the-ground experience building engineering organizations, we're changing the way you think to change the way you lead. Welcome to the TTL Podcast. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today, where we're going to be talking about part 4 of scaling up from garage to global. For those who haven't been following along, we are following a hypothetical company from 3 people in a garage with an idea, all the way through a global organization with many thousands of people, and talking about as an engineering org, how you might scale that, how your processes are different, how your teams are different, how your thought processes are different as you grow. Where we left off last time was a company that was expanding internationally and finding that they were having to placate a whole new set of customers. Maybe placate's the wrong word. They were having to satisfy a whole new set of customers that weren't the customers that used their product. In this case, regulators who had different demands, different timelines, different understanding about technology. And we talked about how they might structure themselves, how they might think about those challenges, as well as having to tamp down or compete against these upstart competitors that are much smaller, much more nimble, much more focused than they are. And so we talked about how they might be nimble and be able to redirect themselves in order to meet these challenges without completely destroying the engine that they had built, that revenue engine, that build engine that allowed them to be successful in the first place.
What are we going to do today, Mon-Chaio? Where else can we take this?
I think the next step here is to follow this company as they explore new ventures. And so we now have this company which is large enough. They have essentially dominated their vertical. They are the recognized world leader in ride sharing, as I didn't mention on this episode yet, but that's the hypothetical company we're talking about, somebody building a ride-sharing company. So they have dominated the ride-sharing company. They're the worldwide leader in ride-sharing, and they have built a bunch of different teams and platforms to support that. And now they're thinking, wait a minute, these teams, this technology, these platforms that we've built could possibly support other businesses, couldn't it? And so shouldn't we go out and stake a claim in other verticals, such as courier or food delivery? And I think food delivery is the one that we're going to be focused on today.
Food delivery, not parcel delivery, food.
Right. I think food delivery has a few more challenges to it, so I think it will be a little more interesting of a conversation. But parcel delivery, certainly, any type of delivery, right? I think this company thinks that they have a network of drivers. They have technology on routing. They have technology on dispatch. And so why can't they go into any other business that requires these technologies that they've built and spent a large amount of money perfecting and making world-class?
All right. Yeah, why can't they? Like, what's holding them back? What would be in the way of them? Why can't they just hand someone their phone and say, you've got a car, now go to McDonald's and pick up a burger and take it to this address?
Well, I don't know that there's a ton preventing them from doing that. I think at least in their mind, in this hypothetical company's mind, right? And we tried to say, hey, you, Andy, or you, Mon-Chaio, or you, listener, are the CTO of this company who's grown along with this company. That must be what you're thinking, right? I have this app that my drivers already have. It shows me picking up passengers. Why can't I just replace the logo of a passenger with like a logo of a hamburger? And that's what I pick up. And then, when I picked it up, I hit picked up, and then I drive it to wherever it needs to go. And I think
drop it off.
And I drop it off. And I think you can, but I think the nuances and the details about how you go about starting that business. Mm-hmm. So, Andy, maybe we can lay out what this company might look like at this stage, and what they might be tempted to do, and and how we think that might work.
All right. Let's play the mind games.
All right, the mind games. I like it. So this hypothetical company at this point might be structured in the same three pillars that we talked about in the last episode, namely a rider group, a driver group, and a platform group. But I think the difference here is now they've gone through the regulatory bit. They're obviously still in it, but they've done a bunch of regulatory work and they learned a lot about it. They've now expanded international and learned a lot about what it takes to operate in other countries, that sort of a thing. And what they've realized is in order to keep up with their upstart competitors, they need to be a little bit more agile in how they deal with these types of things. So, for example, what the rider group has done at this point, again, hypothetically, right? This is our hypothetical company, is they've split the group internally into a platform group and an experiences group. So
Okay.
the platform group builds sort of the building blocks of the rider app. Here's how you request a ride. What shows up on the screen when the cars are coming toward you. Things like that, right? And then the experience group can then move quickly in each jurisdiction. So perhaps there is a Cambodia jurisdiction or a Southeast Asia or whatever makes sense for common experiences. And they can say, oh, well, for a rider to require a ride here, they have to do payment first before I let them see anything. Or they have to have met certain requirements. Or I want them to see two maps for two different regions or whatever the case may be, right? But they've segmented themselves into an experience group that's very focused on the customer and allows them to move fast, supported by a platform group that builds pieces that they can kind of Lego rearrange or configure, that sort of a thing.
Right. I think that makes sense. And also it's starting to take on a bit of a fractal nature that you see in organizations a lot, where the outer structure starts to get mirrored on the inner structure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. For the driver group, they've learned that regulation is actually a very big key part of their business. And so while they also have a platform subteam and an experience subteam, just like the rider group does, they also now have a compliance subteam that handles jurisdictional standards, regulatory standards, making sure that drivers who sign up are regulatorily good, as well as existing drivers don't fall out with new regulations coming in. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a check to the other part, right? Because driver experience, their idea is, how do we bring in more drivers? How do we retain drivers? And the compliance side is, how do we make sure only good drivers exist in the platform? And so they keep a check on each other, but they're within the same group. And then lastly, we talked about the platform pillar. It's remained mostly unchanged. But of course, as the driver and rider teams have matured, they've put more features into the platform team. All right. And they said, well, we've proven these features are productionized, but now this isn't our key focus. We actually want to be able to focus more clearly on the customer. And
we've made these special widgets and now we don't want to maintain them. Please put them into the platform.
Right. Exactly. And, maybe you have more technical expertise on a specific thing like network routing or something, right? A rider experience team, while in the smaller stages of the company, they would have to worry about that. Now they say, look, we want to hire some experts to worry about this type of thing. And we want to worry about things that are customer facing.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what this company has decided to do. They said they've decided that the key for whether a team fits within the rider driver verticals or in the platform verticals actually comes down to who's the primary customer of their KPI. So
makes sense.
If the primary customer of the KPI is a customer, that fits in those verticals. Whereas if the primary KPI is, for example, in a routing algorithm, the primary KPI might be time to target compared to Google, Apple navigation, or smoothness of the path, right? Fewer stoplights, fewer turns, that sort of a thing. So
yeah,
that's how we're structured. So now we have the eats business, Andy. And as you were mentioning, why it's just a lot of different parts of this business, right? So you have a rider app where you're allowed to request stuff. So would you just go to that rider app team and say, hey, we want a new front end to your app where riders are replaced by burgers or whatever, or sorry, cars are replaced by burgers, or it now shows restaurants as points of interest instead of stadiums as points of interest. And then you go to the routing team and you say, hey, I need a new feature in the routing algos to do this. And then you go to the driver team and you say, hey, I need y'all to build a new onboarding platform for restaurants as well. Since you built driver onboarding, now restaurants need to come on board, right? So we need you to build a new onboarding platform. Then y'all have platform code. So can you do that? Can you just put it on their roadmaps? Do you just say, oh, can you dedicate 20% of your organization to this new parallel roadmap that I'm building, and all of you are now building this, and 20% of your org is building that, and I want to see that on your KPIs as you do your briefing, back briefing status reports? Do you form a new team and say, hey, well, let's get 100 new engineers, and those engineers will then ask for features from all of these platform teams in order to build? What do you do, Andy?
I mean, you can do anything you want. You could do any of those. I don't think that they're all going to end up with the effect that you're looking for.
Okay.
Because we have to think about what is the mentality of this business now.
Okay.
The mentality of this business now is it's probably still expanding a bit, but in a lot of cases, and you can see it with the evolution of having a platform team in each one of these, in the rider and in the driver departments, which is that they're starting to extract, they're starting to optimize, they're starting to come up with how do we get this all optimized completely. And in that model, they're thinking about things very differently. They're thinking about how can they do these things low cost, little maintenance, and all of that. But what you're going to now be asking them to do is something very different. Well, possibly something very different. Let's talk about hubris for a little bit.
I love talking about hubris. Let's.
Which is the certainty in what it is you're asking them to do. Because these teams will now have very much a mentality of, we're a machine, you give us stuff and we grind through it and we optimize it. So if you go into this with this belief that it is just a small change to the rider app, and it is just a small change to the driver app, all of the routing algorithms stay the same, all of the UI stays the same other than some icon changes and a little bit of search of what are the points of interest. If you go into that and you just say, now build it, they will build it. And they'll build it, and they'll build it bulletproof, and they'll make it great and amazing. And then you'll get it out into the market. And you'll probably find out that it's not quite right. And so you'll come back and you'll be like, okay, that didn't work. And now it's 6 months later. And you think, okay, let's do our second try. And then 6 months after that, let's do our third try. And all through this, you've got your teams complaining that you keep telling us to work on this thing and work on that thing, and now we're confused about what we're doing. So I would say you could do it, but I don't think you're going to get great results, because if you did it that way, you would think, I know what I'm doing, and you're working with a group that is not set up to doubt itself.
I think that's exactly right. So I think what you mentioned, Andy, was around this concept of explore, expand, extract that we've talked a lot on this podcast about, that there are distinct stages in not just a company's evolution, but a product's evolution, and even each individual's build's evolution, where you have to behave differently. And to go to a somewhat tangential topic for just 1 second, we talk about this a lot, not just in product build. One area where we talk about it is in leadership styles, right? We say, look, situations that are different require different leadership styles. Sometimes you have to be autocratic, sometimes you have to be democratic. It's the same thing with companies and builds. When you're in the explore stage, you work and you think and you operate differently than when you're in the expand stage. And I think, or sorry, than when you're in the extract stage. And I think what I heard you say, Andy, is you have these large teams that are in the end of expand and through the extract stage. And this new project is actually an explore project. And you're putting it on these teams, and now you're asking them also be able to think in an explore way. And it sounds like what you're saying is that's probably not going to work too well.
Yeah. I don't think I would recommend that. What about the idea, Mon-Chaio, of we take a few product people and they start testing hypotheses. They go out to potential customers and they talk to other delivery groups that possibly already exist. And then they come back after having tested some ideas that way. And then they come back and they get a couple engineers. And those engineers, they don't build anything, but they start designing an MVP using all of the platform. And then they're told like they don't get to rewrite anything. They need to use what's there in the platform. They start designing it, and then they hand that as a small project to those groups. And they're like, here, 1 week, get us something, work on that. What do you think of that one?
I think that can work better. I'm not sure it works great in practice, though, Andy, and I'll give you an example. I think it's great. I like where your head is at in terms of let's use these platforms as is. We don't want to randomize these teams in Explore Extract. They have important KPIs that they're trying to meet, yes? So we don't want to randomize them and say, hey, completely rebuild your platform for our needs or make this branch and do this other thing that we really need. But on the other hand, it doesn't quite feel right to say, okay, well, the platform has these little cars moving along the road. Let's just change them to sandwich icons. Can we even change them to sandwich icons? Maybe not. Maybe that's not a feature in the platform. So we're just changing.
Should we add it to the platform? Why would we add that to the platform?
Well, right. Or, I mean, it may be just changing some wording, and the wording might not even be right, or the flow might not even be right. So, maybe your rideshare flow is I put a POI down, and then I get a list of options for who can deliver. But what about the menu part of it? I don't have a menu thing in the platform. And
they're just types of cars.
Right. They're just types of, okay, they're just types of cars, right? McDonald's is like the cheap service, right? And then the limo service is like the steakhouse, and you just get a list of cars. So I think that is, if we could do that, that would be great. And I think that there are a lot of things, a lot of explore type expansions where that is probably possible for many companies. I think in our specific food delivery example, I don't think it would work so well to just have to use off-the-shelf platform pieces.
Yeah, I agree. As we went through it, no, actually, before I even said it, I was putting it out there as a talking point. I agree. I don't think it would work too well either, because it's kind of, as we were getting to, we're tying ourselves to the current model of what our business does right now. And this goes back to the hubris. We shouldn't assume up front that the new business is just our old business with a few changes. It might turn out that it is, but if we start out assuming that, we've got like a straitjacket on before we've even explored how could this possibly work.
I love it. Yeah. I think that straitjacket imagery really resonates to me because it kind of constrains you in a way where you can only go in one direction. On the other hand, we do need to understand that we are not a new company here. This company did not get into food delivery because they did all this market research that said food delivery was the next up and coming business and it was $1 trillion business. I mean, they obviously did that. But a big reason they got into it was because they thought that they could outperform any competitor since they have probably already built 60 to 80% of the technology needed to support this.
And that is a hypothesis that they should work on proving.
I agree. I agree.
So I would suggest absolutely. I I think the way that I would suggest that they work on it, and I think we might disagree on this a little bit given our pre-show conversation. I would say the way to approach this is treat it like a little internal startup.
Mm.
You say, we have this idea. We're going to get a group of people. We're going to say, what's our minimal set of people that could figure this out?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be, you need someone with a good product mindset. You need someone with a bit of tech understanding. You need someone who's a bit of a businessman, business person, who can go out and sell it and figure out what are people willing to pay. And all of them work together to start, just like we talked about at the very beginning, the first episode, sitting in that garage, working out, okay, how could we do this? How could we do that? Let's test this idea. Let's try out something here. Let's try out something there. And just like we did then, it's not that we're talking years of that. In our heads, the company made it through that in a few months.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of started getting this idea. They tested out those ideas. And you start with that. But even then, you don't then flood them with money. So I'm going from suggestions of the book Lean Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that they pointed out was, if you flood them with money, you get rid of that imperative to learn. They'll kick into execution mode before they've actually fully fleshed out what it is that they need to do. Now, you can support them, absolutely. Because if part of the hypothesis is our existing platform will make this all much easier, our existing reach, our name will make this all just kind of work,
Mm-hmm.
test out that idea. Product people, business person, go out and check, will the name, we should have given this company a name.
Yeah, I know. It's becoming more and more difficult
Yeah.
without one, right?
Will this name catch on? Will if you saw that you could order food or order drinks or whatever through this, would you trust it more, or would it need to be under a different name because it's just a cognitive dissonance for people?
Mm-hmm.
Does it help or hinder? Tech person, as they start figuring out what this kind of flow would look like, go and dig through the guts of the platform and the driver app and the rider app and figure out, are there things in there that you could scavenge that would be hard for you to build? Pull it out, duplicate it, like copy and paste it if you need to at the beginning to prove the idea. If it turns out that like the mapping system, it does 99% of what you want, but you need to do this massive internal refactor and add in a new parameter, don't bother them with that. Copy it out, make your change, prove that this works, and then work on plumbing it back into the original system. But it's this idea. Don't give this group a ton of money, because then they'll start trying to rebuild everything.
I like where you're coming from, Andy. I think the mechanics of how this would go about, I do completely agree with. I think even though we have these groups that are established with these sets of technologies, I agree that the most successful path is likely going to be fork that code, copy it, put it in a new repository, and release it as something different. Do not try to put it back into the main line of code. And you said that right at the end. I don't know if you gave it a ton of thought, but I don't think at this stage I would ever start to think, hey, I made a change in the mapping algorithm, I'm going to like push it back into the main line at all. I would say that, these two groups, I don't think their code would talk to each other for the most part, unless they were reusing something immediate, like 100%.
In my mind, one of the things that you always need to keep in mind is this business may pivot radically. It may fail. It may turn out that this is just a complete dead end, no matter how excited we were about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you want this company now, it's big enough that it needs to start finding new things it wants to do. I would expect that they've got several of these going on at once.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of those aren't going to make it anywhere.
Okay.
And so if all of them are just like shoving things into the main platform, That's a recipe for the main platform never being able to change at some point. And so, yeah, keep it out until it's proven its worth.
I like that imagery too, because you can see a bunch of these different companies just like piling stuff in and saying, hey, please integrate, please put this in your main build platform in CI, and please allow,
Yeah.
hook this up to your monitoring system or whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. And 5 years later, some engineers going through the code and going like, what does this flag called if is Chicago pizzeria even mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've all seen those flags in code before, possibly not for large companies that are doing this, but we've all seen that. So I agree, Andy. I think fork this code, start to work on it on your own. Don't try and put it back into the main line. But because we do have a head start, we are not quite starting at the beginning like we were when we started this hypothetical company, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, we clearly in episodes, I believe 1 and maybe even episode 2 said, no, there is no iOS and Android app here. You are writing a simple web app that people can use on a mobile browser on their phone to prove something. Yes?
Now here we have a first ability to test one of our hypotheses that we've got the technology to do this better. So we've got this platform team with a whole app setup that should let us easily publish an Android app and an iOS app.
Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
if
have
that's
at it.
Right. And if that's true, then do it, right? The difference between that, as you were saying, Andy, is previously you needed to hire an iOS developer. You needed to hire an Android developer. They both needed to figure out, how do we share code? What parts don't we share? That part has already been solved in your company. And so it's not that we're saying when you start, you should always start with a web app. No, it's around speed of proving or disproving your hypothesis. And since you have these platform teams that make it quick, fast, maybe even faster than proving your hypothesis with a little website, at the very least, not very much slower, you can go ahead and head on out there, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. You probably have designers that can design you cool logos and animations. Utilize them. We're not saying that you can't utilize them. You have them, utilize them. And I think the part that we don't quite see eye to eye on is how small should this team be, or must it be small? So I will give you a couple things for us to think about. One is, our hypothetical company started as 3 people in a garage with no money. Yes. And so they kind of scrappily made their way up, and of course now have, in our example, built this great global company. There are also other founders who have had 3 or 4 successful exits and can pitch to VCs with slide decks. We've seen this in the world, yes? So you get a few founders together that VCs see as superstar founders. They build a PowerPoint deck. They put it in front of the VCs, and the VCs say, hey, here's $50 million. Our food delivery example is more akin to that example now, because not only do we think that our brand and our platform can accelerate ourselves into this space, we also think that our size and our revenue can help accelerate ourselves into this space right now. So this company, I feel like, should be able to say, here is $10 million, $20 million as a way to accelerate our exploration into this space. Now, we can talk about whether that's right or wrong, but if we can give them $20 million and the team only needs to, should, in your example, only be 6 or 7 people, what do we do with the rest of this money? And are you just saying that this money can't accelerate and that money itself is not an accelerator? Is that what you're saying, Andy?
My view on this is that the money will accelerate you to execution. And groups are very good at finding ways to spend money. And so until you have really good evidence Because one of the things is, yeah, you've got these investor pitch cycles. One of the difficult parts of the whole venture capital backed startup ecosystem is having to explain and promote and get that. But one thing it does do is it creates a back pressure on ideas that don't seem to have anywhere to go, get their losses cut before they've got like 100 million behind them. And there's lots of examples of companies that did suddenly get 100 million behind them and then wasted all of it.
Sure.
And so it's not to say that you wouldn't over time fund them to that level. But my view on it is that you would keep them tight.
But can't you keep them tight, but still keep them, like, still grow them large? Like, does everything have to start with 3 developers in a garage for it to be successful with no money? Like, I
don't
can't
think it
imagine
has
that that's
to.
the case.
I don't think it has to, but I think there's a big difference between 3 developers in a garage and no money, and suddenly being given from nothing to $10 million and go start spending it. I think my biggest fear is that you feel that you have to spend the money.
Mm-hmm.
And so you stop testing your ideas, because testing your ideas doesn't give a lot of parallelization.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start very quickly saying, well, we can parallelize by building these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And you start building a whole bunch. And maybe you're lucky, and maybe you built it out. But that 10 million that you were just holding on to and doing that with could have also been split between you and 3 other projects that were all going to try out ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And as an organization, as an enterprise, you've now said, I don't believe those other 2 ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from here.
So yeah. So that's my way of thinking about it. Is this is all about opportunities, and you have opportunities for other things. Now, if you've got 10 million and you don't have a ton of other ideas, and you're willing to just lose it, then I'd say go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd still struggle because you'd start tripping over yourself. So I'd say go for it.
I think setting aside whether it's a good idea for the company to spend this money, because that's a difficult conversation, right? For a company who's, in the 50 million ARR range, spending 10 million on one idea to the exclusion of other ideas probably isn't great. But if you're a public company and you're bringing in $100 billion a year,
Mm-hmm.
Even spending $100 million on an idea might be fine. It's a drop in the hat, right? Especially if you don't have somewhere else to spend it. Now we could talk about, like, should you return it to shareholder? All of that sort of stuff. We're not going to get into that. I'm not a finance guy either, so I'm not going to posit an opinion there. But I do like what you said, which is that oftentimes money leads to build, and build leads to the stopping of testing hypotheses. And I think for a product in the explore stage, it is critical. We both believe it's critical for hypotheses to be quickly tested and checked.
Yeah.
Right? So that, I think, is the barometer that a company needs to use when it thinks about funding.
Yeah.
So
now I have an even worse sin for you than just giving them more money than I think that they should get immediately. And that is holding them to, like, a complete cost estimate and development timeline and all of that to get that money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I think you probably don't see this too much in Silicon Valley tech companies. And Maybe you do. I haven't worked in them. And if you don't see it very much, I would hypothesize that it's because they have so much money to burn in many cases. But the companies that don't have quite as much money to burn, that feel their costs a little bit tighter, they start going down the path of, well, in order to put any money behind this, we need a timeline, a proposal, what your deliverables are going to be, when we're going to get those, what we're going to get out of them. And that creates, well, that actually sets you up even worse, because then what it's setting up is the only thing you can do when you've got this money is now execute as fast as possible in order to try to make those things become a reality, because that's probably what you're going to get measured on.
Right.
But that's also a very common way that in a financial controlling system, that's the way that you make sure that you're not wasting your money. Strangely enough, it causes the most waste of money because you have to have all that time up front doing that planning, doing those estimations, doing the investigation to figure out exactly what it is you're going to build and all of that, to then get it signed off and then usually not be able to deliver to what you just planned because you probably put together a 2-year or 3-year plan.
Or even worse, you did deliver to the plan.
Yeah.
But it didn't work.
Yeah, it was completely useless.
And very likely, if you hadn't put together this plan and you allowed for more experimentation, you would have found something there to salvage, right? That's that hubris part. You will build this. I'm giving you money because you will build this that we think is the right thing to build, without having any idea that, like, maybe it's not. Maybe it's something completely different that after we build for a month, we'll know.
What do we leave people with? What should they be looking for? Is it like entirely on just up to what they're comfortable with, or is there some clear guidance that we can give them about how to do this?
In my opinion, if I were to summarize it, I would summarize it as give as much money as you're willing, able, what your gut feel is right, but understand that often with more money comes a lack of experimentation. And if you agree that you're in the explore phase, and Andy, we haven't actually talked about this. I think maybe a lot of companies believe that they're in the expand phase on these new projects, that they've somehow skipped the explore phase altogether, or the explore phase has been done in a document that was written by a PM or something. But not.
We've explored this. I've talked to 3 people and I've written up this huge document.
I've
it's
written
all
up a
validated.
white paper that I published. And Gartner has taken this white paper and said it's the future or whatever. That's explore, right? So now we're going to expand. If you're in the explore stage, experimentation is crucial. And so if you can experiment quickly, easily, with a lot of money, then do it. But if your money is stopping you from experimenting, then don't. And I'll just offer this one thing, which is just like in the app example, if we had these 3 guys in a garage in our part 1, Andy, but instead they had been given $20 million to start off, honestly, I might have suggested that they start off with the iOS and Android apps. Maybe. I don't know. But I think sometimes money can do that. It can help you accelerate those types of things into saying, well, we think there's a very high likelihood of needing an Android and iOS app. But in our example, that's 2 engineers you need to hire, and they're different, and you need to manage them, you need to build them and whatnot. But if you have the money, we say we have the platform now, you can build it. But if you have the money, sometimes money can help accelerate that too.
Yeah.
And so that's my guidance, is to say, accelerate where you can with money, but keep a close eye that it's not just moving to execution, that whatever you're executing with that money is for quick experimentation.
And I was going to say that. I think the key to it is, though, to keep your eye on the quick experimentation. A company of this size will inherent within it have things that start pulling you away from that quick experimentation. We've talked about a few of them already. One of them is like the essentially the funding process. You need to come up with plans and give a good pitch and all of that. There's another one, which is the KPIs that might start getting applied either to individuals or to the projects or teams themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if all of the company has kind of as one moved from explore to expand and into extract, which this company has. This company is in really big danger of misapplying their measures of success, because this is probably 10 years later.
Mm-hmm.
At this point. They've been now expanding / extracting for a good 3 or 4 years now, probably. And their high level metrics almost certainly are very much about revenue and sales and kind of like that cash coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And if they take that same mentality and apply it to this new venture, they're going to look at that other thing and they're going to be like, okay, Q1, what's your revenue going to be? And the only answer that the new venture can give that's real is probably 0. But that's not going to be an answer that's going to work for this measurement system. And so they're going to need to come up with ways of creating that. And then it starts short-circuiting the ability to actually experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So the 3 horizons model says that there's 3 kind of stages of things, one being a few years into the future, where you're trying to create a new business. And your measures around that should be more about word of mouth, popularity, name brand recognition, those kinds of things. Like, are people even recognizing that you're doing something out there? Your next thing is a couple years away, maybe a year or more. And those are the ones that are just starting to catch hold. They're kind of like today's growth and tomorrow's cash flow. You're not really getting much from them yet, but you're starting to see like, oh, it's growing, it's going. And there, your primary measure is going to be along the lines of sales that you're making. And are you getting those targets that you're looking for in terms of like particular kinds of customers or particular buyers? And then your final horizon is the stuff right now. And so in this company, this current ride-hailing app is in that horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And there, your primary measures are going to be around revenues and market share and profitability. And that's another reason why, if it was just taking people from these teams and saying like, hey, you do what you have been doing, but now start working on this new exploration idea. Their measures of success are completely antithetical to trying out a new idea. In fact, if they tried a new idea, it would harm all of their measures. And it would probably end up with those teams sabotaging the new idea because their measures tell them that working on that idea is bad for their career.
Mm-hmm. Or bad for their company. We gave an example, I think, in our very, very first episode, analyzing a situation using BART, where we talked about a company that said they were building a business product and a consumer product. And the consumer product looked at the business product and said, I mean, you have no users. Why would I give you any time of day to help you build these? I have my KPIs that I need to hit. And so leadership said, well, here's some new explore KPIs for you to hit.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, but these KPIs don't really move. So I'm just going to continue to do my expand extract work, right?
Yeah.
So yes, that's a very apt example, Andy. And I think it happens all the time. And so, yes, I really, really do believe, and it might be weird to hear, well, it's just a person. Like, why can't they expand one time and explore, 2 hours later? Or why can't they extract for 4 hours a day and then explore for 2 hours a day? Just in practice, and I don't have the psychology papers here because we haven't researched this, but in practice, I have very rarely, if ever, seen that work.
Yeah. Like just the mental gymnastics to shift from one mode of thinking to another, from one second to the next, can be difficult. It's hard enough at more of like the executive level, the management level, to kind of go from thinking of hearing about the progress on one to hearing about the progress from another, and having even like the metrics in front of you, and trying to think about like, is this going well or is this not? Am I hearing the responses that make sense? Because it has to be so contextual.
Right. You have to remember, if it's an extract phase thing, I need to harp on them about this detail that I see that's not meeting the revenue goal. Whereas if I'm in the explore phase, I need to help them generate creative ideas and make sure. And that's a very difficult change to make, even as an executive, I agree. And I think, Andy, that is actually why, I mean, we're starting this series to talk mostly about how do you structure and scale engineering organizations. Now, this episode has delved a lot into kind of how you think about a company and exploration versus extract. But I think that was super necessary because basically, Andy, I think our tactic is for this hypothetical company starting food delivery, start a new group, which is almost completely separate than the old group. Put a new leader into place, make them copy technology. Yeah, ask them, say, hey, I copied your code, but I couldn't understand this part. Or did you think about doing this? Yeah, those are great conversations to have. But day to day, those groups should be almost separate because one exists in expand, extract, and the other exists in explore. I think that's the structural thing that we think about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I
And
think and you touched on then, as a leader, as a CTO, then how do you judge success of that organization? How do you manage them? And we talked about, well, you need to change the way you think about your KPIs. They're not revenue based anymore. They're exploration based, and you have to shift your mindset and allow them to be able to do that exploration. So we are almost at the end of our 5-part series here. Next time, we will be talking about the last part about company scaling, where a lot of these companies luckily or unluckily get to as they have a little longevity, which is they scale by acquisition. And Andy, I think you and I have both been in companies that have acquired other companies or been part of companies that have been acquired by larger companies.
I've been in both. I've been in a company that acquired other companies, and I've been in a company that's both been acquired by another company.
Yeah, I have not been in the latter. I've only been in companies that have acquired smaller companies.
Right.
So the topic for next time will be our hypothetical company acquiring one or more smaller companies that don't quite behave like them and don't quite have the same technology stack. And what do we do with that? How do we think about how we structure our organization, how we shift and grow our organization as these sorts of things happen? So please join us next time as we finish up with part 5 of scaling up from garage to global. If you enjoyed this podcast, please recommend it to your friends. And whether you enjoyed it or not, hopefully you have some thoughts about what we've talked about today. Please reach out to us at hosts@thettlpodcast.com. That's hosts with an S at thettlpodcast.com. We also like to point out at this time that we help individuals and companies go through their scaling pains. And as you may have heard, we don't really do it through less or safe or through scaled agile or anything like that. We like to start from the principles that we've talked about in these episodes that you've heard. So if you or your company needs help with that, please also reach out to us. Until next time, be kind and stay curious.